Next to the last legislative breakfast, we have one coming up June 4th at Bridport. That'll be the final, when their legislators are going to come down and tell us all the stuff they did. Or didn't. Nice turnout here this morning. Love to see families here. That's great. I thought I was going to have to teach school again. I used to do that for 40 years, so with all the young kids around, I figured maybe this was my chance to show my skills off again. Coming down this morning, I'm Bill Scott, by the way, from Addison County Farm Bureau. I was coming down to listen to the radio at Middlebury Station, and they announced that there was a legislative breakfast this morning, so I knew I was in the right area and where it was. But they reminded me that Governor Hoff passed away. And I have a story. I was state FFA president for 2 years, and I remember in Castleton we were doing our state convention, and the governor was going to be there, Governor Hoff. And the night before, it was 10:30, and we're practicing what we were going to do with the ceremonies and then how we were going to introduce people. And I got where I was just joking around. I was tired. And our advisor was Cola Watson. I don't know if any of you people were in FFA remember Cola. Tim Buskey does. Cola was a very, very quiet gentleman, very, very nice gentleman, and would never hardly say a word. But up there on the stage, when I got a chance to do my performance to introduce the governor, I introduced him as Governor Philip H. Haas. And Cola says, kind of raised his hand, he said, Bill, don't do that, because tomorrow you'll do the same thing. Well, we got to the big ceremonies the next evening, the banquet and the finale, and I got a chance to introduce the governor. Do you know what I did? I introduced him as Governor Philip H. Haas. And it really got a roar from the crowd, and I'll never forget that. So, a little memory of the good governor. The procedure, I see a lot of faces. I see just about at every one of these and a lot of new ones. The legislators get a chance to have 3 minutes because they have the seniority and have a little more time than the people that want to ask a question who only have 2 minutes. When you go to the mic, and we're being televised here for public TV, use the microphone and use it like I'm using it here, almost like a lollipop. If you stand back like this, you're not going to come in, and it makes it hard for them to record for the TV. So, and when you do come up, introduce yourself and where you're from. It looks like we have a lot of waiting people here today. That's great. And I see one Bridport guy hobbled in this morning. I sympathize with him because a year ago I didn't make a lot of these because I had the same kind of operation that he did. Eugene Audette's in the back. I'm a little older than he is, but ankle injuries are not good. I had to have my ankle fused, so if he gets up to the mic and stands there for a long time, don't worry. He can't move that fast today. So we're going to start off this morning with introducing the legislators that are here this morning. We thank them for their ability to be here and come and emphasize the fact that they're here to answer your questions. So we're going to have them introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Claire.
Good morning. My name is Claire Eyre. I live in Addison. I'm serving my 16th year in the Senate, and I'm the chair of Senate Health and Welfare. In the afternoon, I serve on Senate Government Operations.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven, and I'm your other Addison County Senator, along with Senator Eyre. In the morning, I chair Natural Resources and Energy, and in the afternoons, I serve on Education.
Terry Norris. I represent Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I'm on the Ag and Forestry Committee. We just passed probably our last bill out on Friday. It had about 63 pages long. It just has a tremendous amount of stuff in it. Most of it I couldn't even remember today, but hopefully it'll get somewhere when it goes to the floor next week. Saturday I went to Fairhaven Union High School, meet with the parents and teachers and security down there. This is our second meeting at the school. They are extremely concerned after the release of Mr. Sawyer. So there's two bills passing around the House right now to address some of those issues. It will not do anything to help their situation, but hopefully if it happens again, they can deal with it a lot better. Thank you.
Any other takers this morning? We're going to keep these three busy, I think, this morning.
Yeah, sure.
Tim Buskey's got the first question.
I don't even have to tell them where I'm from. Tim Buskey from Addison. I don't have to tell you where I'm from or what I've been doing. Normally I would be up here emceeing your program this morning, but I do have an important question and would like to lead the discussion a bit in the area of legislation that's being proposed for a citizen's right for action. The citizen's right for action is pointed at agriculture, and it needs to be, we firmly oppose it, obviously, any of the language that is in the legislative bills that are being proposed for the citizens' right of action. We feel that it costs farmers money every time someone accuses them of doing something wrong on the farm. And how does it cost them money? It costs them money because they have to answer. If you are accused of doing something out of the ordinary, you must answer, whether you hire an attorney to do that or whether you do it yourself. It's costing you time and money on the farm. So we would like it removed, all the language regarding citizens' right for action removed, and leave us alone. And I know it's very difficult for me to talk too much about the citizen right for action, but it allows the average citizen to step up and say, I don't like the way my neighbor farms, or I don't like something that happens on the farm. Farmers are under a different set of rules with manure management plans, with all kinds of regulations from the state in large, small, and medium farm operation regulations. They don't need a citizen's right for action added in to cost them money.
Harvey's running late this morning.
Well, that happens occasionally. Harvey Smith, I represent the towns of New Haven, Weybridge, and Bridport. I sit on the House Agriculture Committee, and I agree completely with the last speaker.
So thank you, Tim, for the question. We've been discussing it through emails and for the last 2 weeks. So let me back up, since I assume that not everyone's familiar with the provision. So a citizen right of action says that if there is a law, you can, and generally where this citizen right of action laws are up to 45 years old, they've been all the federal environmental laws, so Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Superfund laws, all these things that are oriented to environmental law include a quote-unquote citizen right of action. And what does that mean? It means that you have the ability as a citizen to request that the government regulate anyone who is bound by that law to follow the law. Nothing more. So it's not any more stringent. It is simply that if there's a law, it has to be followed. I would differ a little with Tim's interpretation when he said it's pointed at agriculture. It is pointed at no one in particular. Water quality laws apply to wetlands. They apply to roads. If you name a place where water falls, and Vermont has water quality laws that apply to it, and they have to be followed by everybody. That is the sort of the even playing field where it starts. here in Addison County, because we're the #1 agricultural county. It's natural, I think, that people look at it through the agricultural lens, but I do just want to be clear, it is not pointed at agriculture. So sometimes people see it as lawsuits being filed against potential violators. So let me also back up to talk about the process. If someone believes there's a harm being caused by a violator, alleged violator, you have to, first there's all the rules of civil procedure apply. No one, it's not that anyone can just say there's a water quality violation. It has to be that the action, that the alleged violation is concrete, it's specific, it has a connection to that individual, it has to be redressable through law. So there's a whole body of law about even having the ability to file the notice up front. And what you do, if you file a notice, it's called a notice of intent to bring suit or bring action, and it starts a 90-day clock during which I hear the clock going over here, the 90-day clock, and during that period, the agency that regulates, so in Vermont on these things, it will probably be mostly Agency of Natural Resources or Agency of Agriculture. They need to come out to the site of the alleged violation and assess whether or not, in fact, under law, there is any violation. If there is, then they notify that property owner of this. Fairly often it can be that someone's unaware of water quality laws and they may not be intending to violate at all, but what they're trying to do is first inform and then come to an agreement about how to fix. So here's another click, I'm going to stop there. If someone responds, so let me give you the two, it will make no sense to stop quite yet. If there is no violation found, the law says you cannot bring any suit forward. You are blocked, that's it. If you are in violation, the law says you must respond. If you respond, the suit can't be brought either. As long as there's some sort of action taken to respond to the violation, the lawsuit is precluded. So all it does in the end is say, if there is a law, it ought to be followed. It provides a 90-day window for assessing that, and it provides a pathway to solving the problem. And the last thing I'll say is it is not a penalty. It's not a damages sort of suit. It is a suit that would compel someone, if they're in violation, to then meet the law.
You gotta get to the mic. Line up like the airport with the jets. If you want to talk, line up behind somebody and it'll be next.
I'm Randy Krakowski, I'm from Whiting. I'm not a farmer and I understand farmers' concerns on this bill. I might have the same concerns if I'm a farmer, but I'm speaking as an environmentalist who's worked in the United States with various agencies in Vermont and in Pennsylvania, New York State, and then I had the privilege of working Eastern Europe, Russia, and China. And I found one theme throughout the entire world, and that is that environmental enforcement is not self-acting. It works best when it's working in partnership with citizens. And having the eyes of citizens on the ground is the best protection we have for the environment. So I understand that farmers feel this is aimed at them, but actually it's not aimed, as Chris said, I think very nicely, it's not aimed against someone, it's aimed at protecting the environment. And I want to say I really, really support this initiative, and I think we need to give time for it and to see how it will work before we prejudge it and before we overreact with fear. Thank you.
Tim and then Bill.
Just a quick reminder, which one of us doesn't defend ourselves when we're accused? And I don't think there's anybody here, whether you're accused of turning left out here in a no left turn lane, or whether you're downtown with a parking ticket and you're accused of parking in the wrong place. You respond when you're accused. And what does response take? Takes time and takes money.
And Perry, Bridgeport. We're going down a sort of a slippery path. I remember my kids coming home from school and asking about our septic system. And I wrote a little note, and it wasn't very politically correct, sent back to the school. It was none of their GD business. And we're getting a lot more of this idea. We push this organic labeling or GMO labeling, and the only people it concerned was the people who would have never bought anything or grown anything that wasn't. But we have to have a law. Now we want Red Guard, and I think that we don't need all that. We were talking about toxic substances, and now we're going to want to have a legislative, have some committee or whatever to study those. And if I want to use Windex, I'll use Windex. I don't think that I've got to use newspaper to clean my damn windows. And we're trying to get people to, I don't like what he is doing. We've got a whole bunch of that in our colleges, and I don't think that we need to enhance that. Thank you.
Terry?
We had somebody, I believe she was from the Department of Environmental Conservation, and she indicated that everybody has these rights already. They usually get around 2,000 complaints every year, and about 10% are actually, they're all inspected, and around 10% are actually violations. So I'm not sure that we need another law to override one we already have.
Yes, I serve on the same committee that Terry does, and I heard those comments made as well. But I'd like to back up a little bit, and that is, we have a law, we need to follow the law. And it's as simple as that. And we don't need to continue to add on programs that increase the risk, and I wouldn't say benefits, but the risk associated with our farms and our farm plans. And I think right now most of the focus is on agriculture, and we heard that very loud and clear when we had folks from Lake Carmine come down to the legislature and talk about what they had been experiencing the last 2 or 3 years, because everybody's pointing at them, because they've been told that 85% of all the phosphorus coming into their lake causing the algae blooms is coming from agriculture. And so these folks have been working for the last couple of years and under fear. They're fearful of their neighbors. They used to have a good relationship, but now that the finger pointing has taken place, when they open the door, they kind of look both ways to see if it's safe to come out. And for these farmers to come to the legislature and talk about what they have been living through was just amazing. I just couldn't believe that we had any part of our society living under those conditions. It's just wrong in the state of Vermont and in the United States to live with that kind of fear. In this bill that Chris did a really good job explaining, but he didn't explain it all. And that is, when there's a complaint come in, then the agency, whether it's ANRDEC or the Agency of Agriculture, comes down and needs to inspect that situation and find out whether there's a violation or not. If there's not a violation, then they write it up, and Chris is correct, it should go away. But if anybody really has spent any time looking at a nutrient management plan, we know that the goal of that is to reduce phosphorus coming off the land. So we need to manage our crops and our cropland and kind of an optimum range of phosphorus. And in doing so, we have some variation in there. So we might have a phosphorus plan or a nutrient management plan that says that you can spread 5,000 gallons of liquid manure on this piece of property on the per acre. And yet the plan has some variation to it, so you could put 300 gallons on there, or you could put 700 or 800 gallons on there and still be in compliance with your plan. Where the complication comes is people don't know how to read these plans, and they say, well, it says 500 pounds or gallons, so this is all you can put out there. Well, that's not true. So then the suit doesn't just go after the farmer, it goes after the agency that's responsible for that too. So they have to defend themselves along with the farmer has to defend themselves, and it ties everybody up. And I'm thinking that in order to improve water quality, we should allow these resources, especially on the state level, to be able to work with the farming community and solve a variety of problems and not defending what the farmers are doing correctly. And I know there's some bad apples out there, we all know that. And those bad apples need to be brought to task, but we don't need to live in a police state.
Let me just to fill in a detail. So thank you, Harvey, for talking about a nutrient management plan. So I met with Ryan Patch from the Agency of Agriculture, as well as former Representative Allison Eastman, who's now Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, and we spent the morning on nutrient management plans and how they are used. So, as Harvey points out, the plan is, I believe Ryan told me that the frame of reference for following your NMP is over something like an 8-year period. So it is because there are things like variation in weather, everyone knows. So it doesn't make, it's not a rigid plan that you meet that plan every single day. It is that there's allowable variation because farming is a highly variable activity. And I think the sort of common sense protection that's built into this is that the Agency of Agriculture itself, that well understands NMPs and well understands farming, is going to be the one determining whether or not there is the violation. So I know that it is, I would say it's true that the average citizen, and although I've looked at NMPs, worked through them, talked to people, helped complete a form, I don't know all the ins and outs of NMPs for sure. And it wouldn't rely on people like me to make any kind of judgment. It would be the Agency of Agriculture working with the farmer, not a third party.
I'm Eugene Audette from Bridgeport, and my family has a large farm, which isn't very large compared to many in the country, but in Vermont, I guess people think it's a large farm. So over the last 10 years, there's about 30 of us in the state that have been large farm permitted. And we have opened our doors to the community, to the legislature, to the ag departments, to everyone to help the environment in our practices. And we are all working together, and I'm opposed to this bill. My family is opposed to this bill. This bill does nothing for us to work together. This just puts us against each other. This opens up the door to lawsuits that are harmful, that cost money. If you want to work with us, Senator Bray, kill this bill, please.
Well, thank you. I've spent quite a bit of time at Blue Spruce Farm, and I've often cited the Audettes and that farm as an example of sort of a pioneering farm in the state of Vermont. Over the years, I've worked with them on things like the cow power program. They are the first cow power farm in the state. They now have solar, they have wind, they have manure injection, they were doing airway tilling, a whole variety of leading edge practices over time. So, I understand your perspective. I think you're probably as I said, when people talk to me about what's going on that's innovative and helpful and environmentally forward-looking in the state of Vermont, I point to blue spruce. So I think, I'll just want to, I'm also very cognizant that I live in Addison County, the #1 agricultural county in the state of Vermont. I think a lot of people here are proud of the heritage we have and the really stunning landscape that we have. So I think there's a lot to be proud of, and that the people who are leading the way have nothing to fear by a law that, as Harvey himself said, it requires you to follow the law. And those who are in the forefront, I think, will just continue to help others learn how to do their practices better.
We have a law, it's a water quality law that we passed in the state a few years ago, and through that process we had to come up with a number of different things. We had to come up with some new required agricultural practices. Prior to that, we had accepted agricultural practice that had been on the books for 18 and 19 years. And now we have a new set of rules to follow, new regulations. And I've got to tell you, I want to refer back to the folks that came to us from Lake Carmine. And even without this law that you're talking about, Chris, we had people spying on the farmers. And they would ride around in these little vehicles and take photos of different things. They, in some cases, they even went into their barns and took photos. And at private property, you have no right to be on private property. If you're doing this from the town right away or the state right away, that's one thing. But if you're invading private property, that's another thing. And so what this is doing is just setting the stage for more of this surveillance, when right now, and I know because I live in an agriculture community, and I see these little vehicles with either state or federal plates on them buzzing around our community in a regular basis, and I ask why they're here. And part of it is because we had a complaint. We had a complaint from somebody. They have to follow up on every complaint right now. They have to come down and investigate that complaint. They have to make sure that everything is in compliance. If it's not in compliance, then they have to take corrective actions and do it. And so I think we're in really good shape the way it is now, and I just can't believe that the farm community, the municipality, the citizens are going to have to live under this constant fear of having somebody. What are they doing out there? And we're the only industry. Agriculture is the only industry in the state that's asked to keep their land open for a wide variety of recreational activities, for hiking, biking, bird watching, hunting, all kinds of things that we do. And we expect that. And I don't know, I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, wow, somebody's going to watch everything that I do. And it's not just water quality, it's wetland related issues too. Right now, the Department of Environmental Conservation is going through a rulemaking process to determine whether farms need to get permits to work on the land that they've been working on for 200 years. And that's going to be very costly. We had a couple examples where they wanted to make some water quality improvement projects. It was going to cost them $12,000 just to get the permit, just to get the right to have access to the land that they're working today. It just doesn't seem to stop. It just keeps piling on top of each other, and at some point in time, we have to have faith in the fact that we have some good laws in place and that folks are going to do their best to follow those laws, and we don't need to create anything, another level, another tier to go through.
I'm back again. If this citizen's right of action is a good thing for agriculture, as you're indicating, Senator Bray, then why don't we scrap the other laws we have and make a citizen's right of action for everything we do? Whether it's a traffic violation, or a violation at home, in your own yard, or wherever. Let citizens make a citizen's arrest anywhere. If it's good for the agriculture community, why isn't it good for everybody else?
Let me answer something Harvey brought up, and then I'll come back to that one. As a matter of fact, on the Senate floor, I introduced an amendment, and I invited Senator Starr to sign on as a co-sponsor, and it took the $12,000 permit that Harvey was just talking about and reduced it to a flat $200 fee. And the reason for that was because there's an environmental benefit to the kind of permit that was being talked about, and that was to be able to install a manure pipeline across a wetland in order to be able to transport manure from pond to pond or pond to out to when you're doing dragline injection. I'll just say that I'm aware of, we want reasonable laws, and that was an unreasonable cost assigned to something with an actually with an environmental benefit. So hopefully the House doesn't strip out that amendment I put in and the Senate passed, and the fee will be $200, not $12,000. As for Tim's good question about citizen suits for everything, I would leave it to him to propose. Here you are. I would leave it to him to propose that, but as I said, there's almost a 50-year history of enforcement of environmental laws throughout the United States. All the federal environmental laws have been enforced this way, included this provision. So I think because it's new, and most people don't like change, I think it's pretty natural to worry about what would it mean. Might there be negative unintended consequences? But there's a long track record of this law working well federally, and 20 plus other states have such a law. So I would ask us to be patient and I don't expect Vermonters to change one iota. I think we will have the same sort of down-to-earth way of using any law that's on the books. And then there's one other slightly wonky piece of why you wouldn't do a right of action on all these other things. Environmental laws, for many, many laws, if there's a violation, you have access to the courts where you can bring a grievance about someone breaking the law or allegedly breaking the law. But there's all these environmental laws are done through administrative law. There is no court you go to where you can seek, quote unquote, justice or action. And that's because we've created things, there are rules and regulations promulgated by agencies, not written by lawmakers and not written by judges, as in judge-made law, case law. So the only way in order to ensure that a citizen has right to bring an action and have a judge look at it is through the citizen right of action. So it is the right to see a judge and bring a question forward if there is an actual violation.
This is actually in response to one of Eugene's questions, and that is, where else is there this amount of scrutiny? And I would suggest you think about healthcare for about 30 seconds. Hospitals, nursing homes, every kind of healthcare institution in the state of Vermont has to put their long-range plans, their vision of care. We have a Patient's Bill of Rights. The state pays a healthcare ombudsman for old people, for people with mental illness, for young people, you name it. We hire someone to help them make sure that they are getting the things we're looking after their rights, that the health care they got in this particular institution stood up to their Bill of Rights as the state declared it, and as the hospital or the nursing home or whatever declared it. Everything's online, everything has to be documented. Same thing happens in doctors' offices. You notice we've stopped doing labs in our offices and things like that years ago. Too much regulation, it just wasn't worth the trouble. So I'm not saying it's not an issue, and it doesn't change what you do and how you see what you do, but there's a lot of regulation up there.
Yes, there is a lot of regulation, and healthcare is broke, and we can't afford more regulation. And I also would like Senator Bray to think about who he's representing. I don't think this bill came from his voters. And I think if he was to poll his voters, they would not be in favor of this. I think you need to remember who you're representing when you go up to Montpelier. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Senator Bray said about the wetlands and the $200 permit fee. And that is true under some circumstances. And it only deals with laying the pipeline for liquid manure to get it from one satellite pit to another, or the home pit to a satellite pit. And so that was only there. What I was talking about, we have a lot of people that are pasturing animals. And so this time of year, I mean, I didn't see any animals out on pasture when I came down through here today, but they're going to be shortly. But in a year like this, when it's wet, they're walking in mud. What happens to that mud? It turns into cloudy water and it floats down to the stream. So we're trying to prevent that. We're trying to stop that from happening. So the permit that I was talking about was putting a cattle lane down into our current pasture, something that's already being used for agriculture, to improve it so the animals could walk and stay nice and dry and out of the mud until they got to the pasture, and then they would go in there. Most people are using rotational pastures where the animals are in there for 12 hours or 24 hours and then they move to another location. So they're not going to really do an incredible amount of damage in the field itself or in the pasture itself, but in the waterway that's there. And that's where that $1,200 fee was, and that was just for the right to be able to start this process. You still had to go through the design specs, you still had to go through the building specs. What we're doing is we're forcing the folks that want to do the right thing and find ways to come up with water quality solutions to improve water quality. We're making it so expensive that they're just going to throw their hands in the air and say, look, this isn't allowed practice. I can walk my cows through the mud. And we don't want that to happen. We want to clean up the water. The goal is to clean up the water. So what we need to do is find ways to make that happen in a reasonable fashion. Now, it goes beyond just the fee, because the fee just gives you the right to start the process. Then you have to hire somebody to come in and delineate your land for you to find out whether it meets those hydric qualities and hydrophytic vegetation and all of that kind of stuff. And I got to tell you, years ago, I had a map drawn up of Addison County, and I had on the map the wetlands as identified by the National Wetlands Inventory map. And then I asked to put on there hydric soils. Hydric soils are soils that have a condition for wetland. The hydrophytic soils are there, and then the soils with hydric inclusions. And I got to tell you, people don't realize this, but about 85% of all the soils in Addison County fall into one of those three categories. Most of them in the hydric soils and the soils with hydric inclusion. That means any process that anybody does, whether it's putting a driveway into your new home or whether it's putting something, you're going to have that land delineated. Because if you don't, and the state comes down and finds that that shows some signs of wetland characteristics, either vegetation or the hydric soil or hydrology, you're going to have to pay a fine. So we're headed down a road that's going to make it so incredibly costly that we're not going to be able to function. And if our goal is to clean up the waters and make water quality improvement, we need to have some flexibility in doing that.
My name is George Mills, I'm from Shore, and I want to direct a question over to Claire Ayers about the universal primary care bill that's been making its way through the legislature. If you could speak to what it is so people understand it, and also what you see as the path forward for its getting passage.
Sure. The universal primary care bill passed through the Senate. By the time it got out of appropriations, instead of being a citizen tax-funded program, it was funded by other, funded any old way it could be, and it would only be funded if we could figure out a way to do it that did. There were a lot of laws that it was not. They took the commitment to give universal care, primary care to all citizens in Vermont. It passed out of the House Health Care Committee in its original form, which was very surprising to me. It now goes to appropriations, where I expect. I'm not very optimistic about what will happen. I think if they pass it out of appropriations at all, it will be changed to a non-public funding kind of program, the way it was changed in the Senate. But I would be surprised, with 2 weeks left, if a new bill goes into the House for action.
Just a follow-up question. Would that suggest to you that it probably requires more work next year and the next season?
Oh, yes, it would. As you understand, this is the end of the biennium, so that work starts over again. Work that isn't finished this year, bills that don't make it for the governor's signature are over. And so it'll be a do-over, but those sorts of things happen all the time. It doesn't mean it's impossible.
This can't be the end.
I guess I'm a little bit like an elephant. I have a long memory. And when someone was asking Senator Bray who he thought he was representing, I recall him pushing a whole, trying to create a whole thing of organic farming and registration and stuff. That was 2 years ago. He come this year and said, well, that isn't viable, I understand. Of course, everybody knew it wasn't viable then, but here we go again, Chris. You seem to think. I remember one of your predecessors in the legislature, Representative Frieden, and we were at Shoreham, and he opined that the business community didn't know what they wanted, and then someone mentioned something from the farming community, and he said the farming community doesn't know what they want. And so maybe you've taken taken a page out of his book and decided that you're the only one that knows what we want. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to respond to the idea that these are not issues that regular Vermonters and regular people in Addison County care about, because I've gotten a lot of calls over the last 16 years complaining about local farmers for one reason or another. It's usually too much manure or cows that don't look like they just came from the groomers. But each time I've said to them, we have an agency of agriculture, you need to call them and tell them what you think. If you think it's polluting the water or if it's cruel to animals or whatever. It happens all the time that people complain. But every once in a while, I ask for feedback from the commissioner, and now the secretary, and every once in a while they do find a farm that still doesn't understand what the rules are or the things that they can do to follow the rules. So it's there are a lot of people, but I am surprised, and I understand the fears that come from the farmers, that people who don't know about farming are going to drive by something that looks a little messy, like everything does this time of year, and think it means it's badly polluting the water or whatever. But the way it works now is they call me or they call the Department of Ag. The Department of Ag says, well, they're following the rules, this is how it is, and that's how the system works. And it's been unusual in the 16 years, so probably 25 or 30 complaints that were actually followed through, that the department has found has found a real issue and they've dealt with it. Nothing, they worked with a farmer and helped them figure out this water quality, how to change their practices to do it. And it wasn't a huge thing in each of those cases. But it is how the system works in it, and it does work okay. People will complain because they don't know what you're doing, but I don't know how it's going to be any different or any worse if this bill passes or if it doesn't.
I wanted to follow up on Mr. Payne's comment. I'm not sure what bill he's referring to. I haven't put in any organic standard bill or anything along those lines, so must have been another representative. But I do also want to, so I wrote a lengthy letter to Marie Audette last week, and when she first asked me about citizen right of action. I drafted a reply. I took it to Legislative Council because I'm not a lawyer. I wanted to make sure that the information I was sending back was accurate. I sent that back, and kindly enough, the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition wrote back with some follow-up questions. Here's the 5-page document that includes my original and their reply. I actually shared the response with Legislative Council on Friday before leaving for the day, and I'm going to ask them to help me vet the questions back. Again, I'm happy to share the full correspondence with anyone in the room who's interested. Please let me know. I'll email out the whole back and forth. I work hard to be scrupulously fair and as accurate as possible in the work I do. I don't ever pretend it's perfection. That's why I'm happy to be in a dialogue with people. I'm happy to work with Legislative Council to make sure that what we're sharing is accurate information. And so again, if anyone wants more information, see any of the kind of correspondence, I'm happy to include you in it. Please let me know before you head out the door or email me this week.
So in a response to Claire's comment about complaints, there are complaints, and I believe years back there was a ruling that if the Ag Department got a complaint, even if it came from an anonymous call, someone doesn't even have to leave their name, the Ag Department has to respond. And they do. And they come to our place. And we've seen it many times. They'll get a call from someone, and they don't have to leave a name, which I think is totally unfair, but they don't have to leave their name. Audettes are spread manure. It's February. So the Agency of Ag comes and visits us, and we were moving manure from one lagoon to another lagoon in February. So that was the answer to that caller's question. So we already have that law that says the agency has to respond to all the calls, even if there is no name. I think we're very well covered. We're always more than willing to explain what's going on.
I'd like to switch, looking at the water quality issue, from the farmers' concerns to the concerns about these sewage spills from cities' water mains and septic systems breaking, and that seems to be in the news a great deal, the gallons of untreated sewage that go into the rivers and into Lake Champlain seems horrendous to me, and it seems that it keeps happening over and over, and I don't know what's happening or what can be done to help these cities and towns with malfunctioning systems get them in a better shape. Thanks.
So I agree. I think no Vermonter wants to hear about large-scale spills, and they happen in the form of, they're often referred to as CSO, combined sewer overflows. So wastewater treatment plants are a bit like digesters. They have billions and billions of bugs in there that are digesting the waste that's circulating through the tanks, and so when there is a heavy rain event that brings a tremendous amount of water in excess of the design flow for the wastewater treatment system, if they just sent it through the system, it would literally wash out all the beneficial bacteria that are in those wastewater treatment tubs and basins, and it would basically sort of ruin that wastewater treatment plant. So by design, when they get heavy rain flows, they divert water and don't put it through the plant, putting the whole plant at risk. So those are what are called combined sewer overflows, and that is an engineering design that dates back 50 years or so. What's happened in between is that if you look at a graph of rain events in the Northeast, Vermont in particular, you'll see we get heavier rain events on a higher frequency than we used to 50 years ago. So when we get a big slug of rain, you get a lot of storm water, it goes through the system, and we get these combined sewer overflows. I think one thing, so there's two things. One is the ratio of stormwater to wastewater is usually in the neighborhood of 1 gallon in 3,000 to 1 gallon in 7,000. It is highly diluted. Now, no one wants untreated wastewater flowing out, but I would just say it looks worse than it sounds. When you hear about a 500,000 gallon overflow, it's not 500,000 gallons of raw sewage, it's 500,000 gallons period, with probably 1 part in 5,000 being sewage. So it is something we need to fix. It's not acceptable, but there's a heavy engineering cost to separating out storm sewers from wastewater sewers. 50 years ago, it seemed like a good idea, put in one set of pipes, use it both ways. Now they're realizing with changing weather patterns and heavier rain events, we need a different way of doing it. Towns all over the state are in the process of changing them out. It is a very expensive process. There's a large revolving loan fund that towns can apply and use money from. And if you look at the Lake Champlain TMDL, the largest area of expense in that 20-year budget is for exactly this kind of work. So I expect to see more and more municipalities floating bonds in order to do major upgrades to stormwater and wastewater treatment plants and the systems leading to them.
So, yeah, I like your comments. So I've heard that when you look at municipalities dumping sewage, and you look at agriculture and their manure issues, I've been told that the ag area is an easier target. But when you're giving municipalities time to come up with the money, time to retrofit their systems to do a better job, that's what agriculture is asking too. And this bill needs to be killed. We don't need this to be in our way. Please.
The question I heard was, what are we doing about it? The sewage going into the lake and the waterways. And first year I was chair of Senate Health and Welfare. It was before Senator Bray was in Natural Resources, I think. We actually took testimony about it because it seemed that Natural Resources just couldn't get off the dime. It didn't have enough momentum to get any rules passed. And we actually accomplished a couple of things. One was actually suggested by Diane Lamper, the rep for GENS, and that was that the Department of Health and the Agency of Natural Resources were required to post every time there was an overflow. And the Department of Health was required to post on public sites what the dangers are of E. coli and human waste, and who knows what kinds of chemicals that we use and throw down our toilets going into places where we might be drawing drinking water, like Lake Champlain, or where our kids might be swimming. But when I suggested that there be a fine per gallon for cities and towns, and that includes Millbury, Shoreham has a system, but I don't know that it has a direct outflow into the lake. When I suggested that there be a fine per gallon, that fine be put in a fund, and if the towns or cities actually did something within 5 years, they got their money back and it was matched, it went nowhere. And one of the reasons it went nowhere, and one of the really strong reasons it went nowhere, is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, who usually town governments see as their huge ally. And every time they see something that will cost towns any money, they fight it tooth and nail, and it's really hard to move against that. And the bill never went anywhere. Since then, I've been busy with other things. I haven't introduced it again. When you realize most of the representation in the Senate, anyway, comes from urban areas, people with these kinds of systems. So Burlington, Colchester is actually pretty good. Rutland, Montpelier, Barry. That's most of the people in the Senate come from those kinds of places. I don't think I could pass it. Maybe it's time for a little citizens action on that.
One last question,
No, it's not, it's just a comment for Claire. Anytime there's an action against the community, as a 25-year selectman in 2 different communities, anytime there's an action like that, it costs citizens money in their taxes. Their property taxes go up. So I think there's a lot of resistance on the part of towns and cities, legal cities and towns, everybody. There's a lot of resistance on anything that would cost more in the taxpayer's pocket as property tax.
Well, Tim, I'm sure someone has told you in your life at some point that there are no free lunches. It's never happened. So we pay when real estate isn't worth much, like on Lake Carmi. We pay when we can't drink the water. We pay when we have to, fix up sewage treatment plants to just keep the big stuff out and let the overflows go in. We pay when there's fewer tourist dollars. The tourism economy around Lake Champlain is enormous. It's millions of dollars in the state treasury that goes to pay for roads and things that we all use. So we pay for it. It's just a question of who pays for it. And I think, everybody has great ideas when they think somebody else is paying for it. And Eugene, I don't know where you went, I'm sure you understand that. But there are no free lunches. And when there's damage done to things that are worth something in money, someone has to pay for it.
You want me to fill the void here?
Sure.
Spence Putnam from Weybridge, and I'd just like to say that we've been dealing with some really contentious issues, and I'm really pleased to see that we can have a civil discussion about that, and also thank the Grange and the Farm Bureau for hosting these discussions. This will be the last one during the regular session. We may be headed for a special session, so that's really what my question is, talking about contentious issues. There's a lot in the news about a possible veto session. So I wonder if the reps and representatives can tell us what are some of the issues that the governor is threatening to veto on, and what can be done to avoid a special session.
The governor has threatened and has in fact vetoed anything with taxes or money in it, or anything that considers working on issues that may raise money in the future. So the big issues are school funding, and the one that sticks out the most is school funding, but there are a dozen other issues. He's probably going to have a dozen vetoes by the time we're finished. The message that the Senate leadership sent to him was, send your people, let's work something out. Now, I happen to work on at least one committee where that happens a lot, government operations. There aren't any partisan issues in there, and they're in there. They were a little late. I think some of them didn't realize they're supposed to be doing that. But they come in, we fix it up, we send a bill that the House likes, that the Senate likes, that the governor likes, it all works out. But it's not happening in other areas of the government, although healthcare and human services, I think it's a little more likely to happen because most of the people who work there have worked there through a number of administrations, so you're less or more careful about how you speak. But the main thing that can happen is we actually work together, and I'm sure that the governor's people would say something similar about us and our willingness to come to the table, but it's not happening for whatever reason.
So Claire referenced, the governor's initial pushback. So he sent a letter back on March 20th that laid out 13 bills that he expected not to support, to veto. And one of those was the Clean Water Funding Bill that the Senate had passed out 29-0. and it listed two aspects. One was that it thought there was some conflict between executive and legislative branches stepping on each other's toes. The other piece was that it proposed a new tax or fee. In fact, it didn't. It proposed creating a working group that would figure out, should we not have enough money next year to continue, we're looking a year and a half ahead. So should we not have enough money in fiscal year 20 to fully fund our clean water work, how might we raise the money? And so it was actually to create a plan so we would be ready next session in case we need money. And no one could understand how that actually violated the no new fees, no new taxes. This was really a plan B. Let's be careful. The governor was hoping for, I think probably everyone's hoping for, if the economy grows enough, the state's revenues to the state grow along with it, and perhaps there'd be enough new revenue with organic growth that we would need no new revenue source at all to fund water. That would be great. I think everyone would be behind that. But we just said, this is such a large commitment. It's a legal commitment. We're under federal law to come up with this funding plan. Let's make sure that we're going to be in the best possible position to respond in a thoughtful and timely manner next year. So I asked 3 times of the administration to put it in writing what those objections were, because when you start talking about vetoes, you're getting into precise legal objections. And the only way to solve those, as Senator Ayer was talking about, the back and forth that helps you put together a compromise bill that's acceptable to both the legislature and the executive branch, you need to get that very detailed exchange back and forth so you can problem solve. So unfortunately, I couldn't get a written response after 3 requests, and then we asked the Secretary of Administration to come in and explain to us, and she wouldn't come to committee. So that was, honestly, I don't like telling this story because it's a little confrontational, but the fact is you need a good partner who will show up and explain in writing in order to have a productive working relationship to sort these things out. It's not about people and personalities. It's about good programs and policies. And there's just one way to do it. You spell it out in black and white. You sit down at a table in good faith, and you hash it out, and you come to a compromise. We have only 2 weeks left. I haven't seen the kind of pattern of doing that back and forth that makes me optimistic. We're going to sort out the many bills that we have that are not in agreement at this point. I know the Senate's overall goal is to do all its best work, to vote and go home, and not plan on a veto session.
Tim, you going to give us another question?
Sure, I'll change topics. I was in another state for the last little while and flew back so I could talk to Chris a little bit more about citizens' right of action. But I think I heard that we were taking men's and ladies' names off men's and ladies' rooms.
Taking what?
Was it? Can you explain what's happening there?
It's going to cut down on pollution.
When that bill was first introduced, it seemed kind of just arbitrary, but once the representative explained why it was, she thought it was a good idea, I had to agree, because the only thing it does is like garage stations, if they have a men's and a ladies, it has to be, if it's a single toilet, not 3 or 4 at a line, they have to be gender neutral, because just as an example, say you have a child, say you are a man and you have a female child that's maybe handicapped, it's very, very uncomfortable to decide which restroom they need to go to. It's uncomfortable for the child and the adult. So that's really the point of the whole thing. They just need to say restroom, not men's or ladies.
want to echo Spence's sentiment that this kind of forum that is so civil is so refreshing and so upbeat and so contrary to what we hear in the national news. When I was preparing to come to this, I read in the Addison Independent about the previous legislative breakfast, and it was about the topic that was the major topic here. And I'm afraid that many people who will read the media and might get a sense of what happened here will say, oh, it's just the same factions coming and airing the same issues, and people aren't listening to one another. But I want to say that, in fact, I am listening. And I find this enormously educating and eye-opening, and I want my colleagues from the farming community to understand that when I stood up and spoke on behalf of this bill for citizens' action, that I'm also working very, very much with farmers in the state to try to find a way of raising the price of milk. It's an enormous concern. You know, those of us who are concerned about the environment and water are also concerned about preserving our farms. We're in this all together. And the passions and the issues and the interests discussed in this room today are very, very deep and strongly held. And I did not feel anger and animosity. I heard concern, and I heard a lot of intelligence, and I want to congratulate everyone, and I want to thank everyone for being so incredibly civil and respectful. Thank you all.
Can I get back to Spence's question about vetoes and so on? Yes. Chris and I and others have spoken about working together with the administration, and I'd just like to point out that this isn't a matter of Democrats and Republicans. My first 8 years in the Senate were with Jim Douglas, and although we didn't agree a lot, we always worked together. And you'll recall very few veto sessions then, and the ones there were over civil unions or marriage. I can't remember. It was a big divisive issue, no matter, and it didn't go by party. So this is unique, and I credit part of it with the idea that there are a lot of rookies working in the administration. They don't understand that that's their job, to go to the committees and work that out. It is unheard of almost for us to request help from the administration and have them refuse. It's very different this last couple of years.
We've got a few minutes left. You can either eat donuts or ask another question. And we do have donuts and a lot of good stuff to eat. I'd like to introduce you to Joe Tisbert, who's the president of the Vermont Farm Bureau. He drove a few miles to be here today.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you, Chris. I know we have a little disagreement, but I hope we can go forward, and keep working on things that are coming up. Could you give us your stance on H663? I understand it's in your committee now. What are the issues you might have with it, and where do you think it might go from here?
So H663, I think the part that Joe's talking about, it is on-farm, and members of the House Ag Committee can really jump in. It happens to be in the Senate, so I'll be very brief, and Terry and Harvey can speak at more length about it. But, this goes back to when I first came into the legislature. We've been trying to find ways for farms to diversify their operations so they're not so heavily dependent on any one income stream. Kind of like if you had investments, you wouldn't want to put all your money on just one thing. And especially right now, with milk prices being so low, people are looking for other things to do that bring some farm income in. The farm accessory bill, so I'll let others describe the kinds of things contemplated, but it got referred to us because it changes the zoning laws. It has an impact on planning and zoning and what the town can and cannot regulate, and that's why it was referred to us. I expect the bill to be voted out favorably on Wednesday.
Yes, it hasn't changed the zoning laws. What it has changed is the definition of agriculture. So as we look to do some value-added agricultural activities, what we were finding was across the state, towns were very inconsistent in how they dealt with, value-added production. So in most cases, if you were growing vegetables, you could put a little vegetable stand out beside the road and you could sell vegetables. In some towns you couldn't. And and then as we started to diversify agriculture and we had more than just the vegetables, we might have vegetables and meat production, maybe some maple production, or maybe a combination of those. And so it kind of didn't fit the definition of agriculture. Right now, agriculture has an exemption from local zoning laws, you know, as far as your field cropping, your siting of buildings. You still have to meet all town's regulations for setbacks. So, and that was there. And the towns have always had some regulations over noise, sight-in, traffic, those kind of things. And we haven't changed that at all. So towns can get involved now. But what we did is we tried to find a way, and by the way, we've been working on this for quite a number of years to see if we could bring some consensus together on the issue. In this last summer, I kind of worked with a group of folks from League of Cities and Towns, state planners, regional planning commission, farmers, advocacy groups, and I know I'm missing a few, but anyway, it's a pretty broad mix of people where we could come to some kind of consensus agreement on what we could support as an industry, and that's basically what this bill does. The bill does not, all it does, it gives a farmer or somebody in this area the right to start an operation, but it does not prevent them from needing to get permits. So if you were gonna prepare some food at your store and sell your apples through Apple Pie, you'd still have to go through the health department to get a permit to have a kitchen. And if you had to put in a wastewater system, you'd still have to go through A&R in order to get a wastewater system that matched that. So all we did is set a kind of a level playing field across the state where anybody that was in agriculture had an opportunity to start a business, and then if they wanted to start it and you needed other permits, you still have to go through that process. We didn't eliminate the need for getting those additional permits. So it's kind of a consensus group. We worked really hard to pull something together, and I think it was a pretty diverse group. When we were dealing with this bill in past years, we had the League of Cities and Towns. We had, VNRC was part of that, Vermont Natural Resources Council. They were part of this group as well. And they want to see a strong working landscape. They just don't want to see a developed working landscape. So they had some concerns that they brought to the table. So bringing all these folks together, I think was a good thing. We came up, I believe, was a pretty good product.
Sounds good. We're approaching the end. I'd like to congratulate and thank the legislators for being here this morning. And I haven't been to the other counties, but I think we have some of the most intelligent ones in our county. They research. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here to make this forum what it is. And I'd suggest that you put the June 4th date, Bridport Grange. Jim here makes a tremendous sausage egg McMuffin. So, excuse me, not an egg McMuffin, but can't call it that. They'll be taking us to task. So come for breakfast there too, and you'll get a good one also. And marvelous this morning for breakfast. Thank you very much, and have a good day, and let's see some sunshine.
Thanks, Chris.